Alright, we are back in Mark chapter 9. We're going to look at verses 16 through 29, and probably will not get through all of them, although I'm hoping we will. And what we're looking at tonight is the subject of demonic possession. And actually, I'm glad we're at this point in Mark. Over and over again in the Torah, God continuously warns, have nothing to do with spirit summoning, with spirit conjuring, or have nothing to do with people that have stuff to do with that. And I think this part in Mark chapter 9 is a good example of why, and we're going to take a look at that. Let's read this through, and then we will discuss it. And he asked the scribes, "What are you discussing with them?" Then one of the crowd answered and said, "Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit, and wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not." He answered him and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me." Then they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you could do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more." Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" So he said to them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting." All right, let's take a look at this. Verse 17. A man in the crowd brings his son to Yeshua, who is possessed with a demonic spirit. Now, are there particular demons that cause particular types of suffering? Yes, and at the same time there are many that say no, it's just one type of demon is the same as all demons and they just cause different things. Whatever the case is, this boy, or actually he's a young man at this point, he's deaf and he's mute, and he has other issues too. Verse 18. He's deaf, he's mute, what else?
He foams, convulses.
He tries to smother him in the water and throw him to the fire.
Gnashing with his teeth.
Now there are some who argue this is just a severe case of epilepsy. Now, it's a medical fact. Every symptom described here happens with epileptics. So, is this just a far-out story of a young man who has epilepsy? Or is this an actual demonic spirit? Let's take a look at that. Whatever he has not only causes deafness and muteness, but also causes physical injuries, seizures, teeth grinding, rigidity, etc. Again, there are skeptics that say this is not a demon, but this is a severe case of epilepsy. However, why is this not the case? This is a demonic possession here. But what would indicate that? The first thing, epilepsy, although can have specific triggers, does everyone understand what that means? There are certain environmental triggers that will cause a seizure. Certain types of lighting can bring about a seizure. Certain pitches and tones can bring about a seizure, and then of course there are also unknowns that can also be triggers of epilepsy. Epilepsy, though, is random in occurrence. What does that mean? It could happen at any given time, in any given place, under any types of conditions. A seizure can happen. In other words, a person can just be waiting on a bus, for example, and none of the known triggers happen, and the person goes into a seizure. So let's take into account, those are facts about epilepsy. 2, epilepsy does not target a victim with any kind of intention. Why? Because epilepsy is a condition. It doesn't have intelligence. It doesn't distinguish who it affects, and it doesn't specifically cause harm or specifically not cause harm. Again, seizures can be different from seizure to seizure. What do we see here that would show us that this isn't just a severe case of epilepsy? The seizures, the attacks, the episodes, whatever you want to call them, do not appear random. What do I mean? They happen at specific times. And what are the specific times? Verse 20. Take a look at verse 20. Then they brought him to him. What does that mean? They brought the young man who suffers from this condition to Yeshua. They brought him to him. And what happened when they brought him to Yeshua? And when he saw him, immediately the Spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. Verse 26, then the Spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him, and he became as one dead, so that many said he is dead. So, did he have random seizures at random times? No. When did the seizures happen? When they saw the Lord. And what does the scripture say? The Spirit convulsed him. Doesn't say his condition convulsed him. It says his spirit, the Spirit, convulsed him. So what does that show? That this isn't a condition, but this is a reaction that has its root from some kind of being with intelligence. Because the Spirit knew when the boy was in the presence of the very one that could remove it. When the episodes happen, this brings us to the next point. Again, a condition has no intentions. What do we see here? The fact that it happened only in the presence of the Lord. And every time it happened, when the boy wasn't in the presence of the Lord in the past, it said it tried to hurt him. It tried to kill him. It would take him over and throw him in the water. What would happen if you threw someone who's seizing into a pool of water? They would drown. A, they're not aware that they're in water, and B, they would have no control over it anyways. It specifically says that it tried to drown him, and then it tried to burn him alive. And then it tried to choke him, foaming at the mouth. Whenever you see, if you ever watch medical documentaries, and you see someone having a seizure, what's one of the things they do? They turn their head to the side, they pull the tongue out of the mouth. Or they also have them like that. Why?
They don't swallow their tongue, so they don't choke on their own vomit.
They don't, and also so they don't choke on their own saliva. Because during a seizure, the foaming of the mouth, it's the saliva glands going into hyperdrive. And so if they're on their back, what could happen? They could drown in it. This thing has tried to drown him, has tried to burn him alive, and has tried to drown him in water. It is trying to destroy him. Now, what else tells us that this is a demonic spirit? Because when the Lord identified it, the Lord called it out. Did it go willingly? What does it say? And when the Lord called it out, it tried to convulse him. It basically tried to tear him apart, try to tear him alive, break him apart upon leaving. What is Satan's intentions, according to Scripture, concerning us? To kill, to destroy. Well, what better way to destroy a person physically than to put a demonic spirit into it and let that spirit just break him apart and injure him and try to drown him and try to burn him? What better way to kill and destroy? Now, notice something else Yeshua does. Does he immediately say, "Come out of him, spirit"?
No.
He confirms that it is a demonic spirit and that it's not a sickness. Was epilepsy a new thing back then? No. Since the fall of man, all the diseases we have now had it back then too. Just different areas, different conditions, different symptoms. Is epilepsy the only condition that causes seizures? No. A bad injury to a back, cutting off a nerve, can cause fits of seizure. There are other conditions that could cause seizures as well. So look what Yeshua does. First, he confirms it is a demonic spirit. How do we know? Because he goes to the boy's father and says, "How long has this been going?" Now, some could say, well, look, it says since childhood. So it could be epilepsy, it could be another disease. True, but at the same time, usually it would have been in their condition since birth. This came along at some point. At some point, this began to happen. When he exorcises the demon, how does he do it? First thing he does is he identifies the demon specifically. Deaf, dumb spirit, get out of him. He not only commands the demon to come out, but what else does he do? He forbids it from re-entering him again. Why? Are there accounts of demonic possession where a demon was exorcised, but a year later, a month later, a day later, whatever, the person has the same affliction again? That's right. So, how does Yeshua make this a one-time doctor visit?
Tell me, don't come back.
Get out and don't come back. commands it, do not return. Do not return. Now, the other thing I want to address is, who did the Father and the Son go to first? Yeshua?
Disciples.
They went to the disciples first. Now the disciples apparently tried to remove the demon because they've had success before, but they weren't able to this time. What was the problem? Why did they have success before, but they didn't have success now?
Not
He
enough
said this
faith.
kind needed prayer and fasting.
What do you have to have in order to have the inclination to fast and pray?
Faith.
Faith. Look what Yeshua says to the disciples. Verse 19. He answered him and said, O faithless generation. And then in verse 29, he says, this kind can only come out by prayer and fasting. Well, again, what do you have to have in order to have the inclination to pray and fast? You have to have faith to begin with. Why would you pray and fast if you didn't believe? So what was the bottom line issue here? It was a faith issue. Maybe the apostles have done this before and may have approached it like this. This shouldn't be a problem. Come out of him, demon. Oh, it's not working. If you don't have faith, then you can't do any work of the Lord, period. A preacher cannot be a preacher unless he has faith in the one that gives him the ability to preach. Because anyone thinks that I can do this, that I'm just a natural public speaker, apparently you don't know me well enough then. I can only do what I can do because of the Lord, and if I didn't have faith in the Lord, I wouldn't be standing here preaching the sermon. Faith. Can you be saved without faith?
No.
Absolutely not, because it's what alone? Faith. So, if you can't be saved without faith, if you can't preach without faith, if you can't do this or do that without faith, what in the world makes you think you could remove a supernatural demonic creature from someone without faith? It was an issue of faith. Now, ultimately, what should this example, along with every example in Scripture of demonic possession, teach us? Go to Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 31. I guess it'd help if I went to it.
You don't have it memorized?
Verse 31. Give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Why? Why should you have nothing to do with tarot cards, with a Ouija board, with 1-800 Psychics R Us?
This opens you up to being demonically possessed.
And demonically possessed. Is that just a neat Hollywood thing you'd see that would entertain you? Because demonic spirits will kill you. They will tear you apart. They will eat you alive. Don't you think God had a good reason when he said don't do this? How many times have you turned on a talk show and you hear the oxymoron, well, I'm a Christian, but I also am a Wiccan practicer. I'm a Christian, but I read daily horoscopes.
Yeah.
I'm a Christian, but I'm an enchanter. I'm a Christian and I play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm a Christian and I call a psychic on a weekly basis to find out how I'm doing and what's going to happen. Do you know what happens if you have anything to do with these people, even if you're not doing the conjuring yourself? You are opening up yourself to be convulsed, to be torn apart, to be killed. Demonic spirits don't like you. There is no such thing as a dead relative coming into someone to tell you they love you and everything's okay. It's a lie from Satan. What does it tell you here? Have nothing to do with people that are into that, but it also says you are to have nothing to do with any kind of spirit. Why? Mark chapter 9. How would you like to be seized and convulsed, almost burned alive, drowned alive, and ripped apart? Do you think God knew what he was talking about when he gave the law and was specific? Have nothing to do with it. Now, how much do you want to bet somewhere along the line this boy, or maybe his father, might have had something to do with the pagan religions of the Romans or the Greeks and other cultures around him? And maybe it opened something up. We know he wasn't born with this condition. Why? Because it didn't say since birth, it said since he was a child. Which means at some point this began to happen in the boy's life.
How many people in your churches that are deacons and pastors that are Freemasons?
Are occultists, yes. You are not to have, and by the way, yes, they participate. If you ever read any of their material, they do participate in occultic ritual practices. How many rabbis are into Kabbalah?
Tons.
Go on the internet and type in Christian witchcraft. There are websites dedicated to Christians who want to practice Wicca.
How many claiming Christians willingly allow their children to read Harry Potter
Yep.
and go watch the movies and throw Harry Potter birthday parties and just parties in general?
Well,
And
they're
it-
not
and
practicing witchcraft.
and
What does the scripture
it
say?
teaches them how to conjure spirits. I mean, they're
Yes, yes it does.
it gives them detailed instructions on how to conjure up demons.
Many of those spells that the actors are acting are actual incantations. Yes.
There's a
And I mean, I work with just about every woman that works in the pharmacy that has children.
Yes.
Not only do they allow their kids, but they are into it just as much as their children
Yes.
are. And they go to church every Sunday. They go to Highlands. There's 2 or 3 of them that belong to Church of the Highlands. And they are bringing that stuff into the church. They're bringing it into their houses.
Because they
And
see
they don't
nothing
see
wrong
anything
with
wrong
it.
with it. And when they talk to me about it, I'm like, I've never read the book, and I will never read the book. I don't watch the movies, and I never will.
God is very
And I don't
clear.
get it.
And not only is it dangerous and a risk to you, not only spiritually and physically, but what else does the Lord say? It defiles you. And when you see the term defiling, if you're going to watch movies about it, participate in it, call your psychic, play with a Ouija board, defiling, it's the same thing as you going swimming in a septic tank. That's right. That's right. There is no being a Bible believer and talking to psychics and having stuff to do with magic and magic use and so forth and so on. What does it say? You cannot be of God if that's the path you follow. because it's the path of Satan. How do we know? Who dispatches and rules and leads the demonic spirits that do this to people? Satan. Have nothing to do with it. Leviticus 19 is a warning. Mark chapter 9 is the end result of what happens when you come into contact with it by doing the things that Leviticus says not to do. What does the Bible say? What does God have to do with Satan, and what does Satan have to do with God? What does light have to do with darkness? Nothing. It's all over